Welcome to Bat Therapy, mental health through the lens of comics and film. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness.
We are your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown and educator and comic aficionado Keaton Hopkins. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube and social media and find our Patreon at patreon.com/battherapy.
This podcast is about providing education and understanding and is not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources. No capes!
No capes. We're back.
Woohoo! Season 6.
Yeah, hopefully everyone listened to the prologue where we talked about our new season of No Capes, where we're just going to be talking about superheroes and maybe even some supervillains, what they do when the costumes aren't on. What's their everyday life like? And the first one we wanted to talk about, which is fitting because that's where the name came from, is Pixar's The Incredibles. Absolutely great movie. Came out in 2004. So
if you haven't watched it in a while,
years.
Shh. Let's not talk about how long ago it was, okay? If you have not watched it recently, watch it again. It is delightful. I forgot how much I enjoyed. I actually watched both. There are two movies. So I watched the first and the second one because I just enjoyed the first one so much. I was like, why not? I love prepping for a podcast. This is fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, watch them again. They're delightful.
They're great movies, very wholesome. But yeah, and even though they're called The Incredibles, we're going to be focusing more on the Parr family. So Bob, Helen, Dash, Violet, Jack, like what and how they already have some difficult things to deal with there.
Yeah.
First and foremost, I'm not going to lie to you, my favorite thing in the world is Bob being a claims adjuster for an insurance company.
I know, right?
What a great role for a superhero.
Well, especially because he was a strength-based one, and so you tend to think of those as doing the most destruction.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I really felt for him. Yeah, so what's really interesting about especially the first movie, and just really hits really well with our theme is they're essentially told you can't be superheroes anymore. And so they're trying to have superpowers and they have this background of doing some really big important superhero work, but now they're trying to just live everyday life and ho hum every day. I mean, there's a lot of really great stuff in everyday life, but it's just such a sharp contrast. And I found it so interesting, especially with the parents, just watching them trying to be parents, trying to raise a family while also trying to be okay with the fact that they aren't superheroing anymore.
Yeah, and that was a big thing too. So first things first, definitely have a little bit of an almost like it would. Well, here's a question for you. Would what Bob is dealing with in this first movie be considered an identity crisis?
Yeah, so Bob, I think, is the most interesting character to me. I think because of the work I do. So I this podcast is not connected to my job in which I get paid. But I work with veterans. And so there are transitions in life that more predictably can make for hard transitions. And so identity crisis, it's not like a diagnosis out there that a person has, which is a good thing because it makes sense that when you have these sharp these huge transitions that happen, it makes sense that you are going to need time to process it and it can be kind of a struggle to deal with. But yeah, it's essentially like sometimes people might have almost like an adjustment disorder where it's not really symptoms, but they're having more trouble than maybe the average bear, shall we say. in being able to move to the next stage.
Right.
But it reminded me, especially with Bob, the same kind of stuff's happening with Helen, but she seems to, I don't know, be juggling things a little bit different than him. But for Bob, especially, he really reminded me actually of veterans and that transition from the military,
Into civilian
where,
life.
yeah, because I mean, think about the similarities with
Yeah.
being a superhero versus you could look at the military, you could look at first responders, also came to mind. But this very focused work that tends to have a very clear mission, a lot of life or death components to it, a lot of really high stakes, high energy, and then trying to live a life without any of that. It can be really hard to feel like you've got purpose and meaning and drive in your
Yes.
life. And so Bob in particular really seems to struggle with that.
Yes, because and I completely I so I saw the same thing because and the way I thought about it, I think about like professional sports players and how they're
Ooh.
just like constantly, I mean, they're oogled and they're ogled and they're
Mhm.
on TV every day and they're in commercials and the, when they're playing their game and they're at the top of their game, they are superstars. Everyone's looking at them and they're
Yep.
important because they are the quarterback for this team. They're the point
Mhm.
guard for this team. And then they retire and it's like there's a little bit something there,
Mhm.
especially if they can get into something like commentating. But otherwise, they go from being some, that feeling is going from being somebody
Yep.
to suddenly no one. And
Yep.
that's got to be so difficult. And it does make me think about what you mentioned with the military. So, I mean, oh, when they're in the military, it's not just that they have a rank
Mhm.
and a position and importance, they actually know what they're doing, and everybody can't just do what they do.
Yep.
And all of
There's
a sudden, that
yeah.
gets taken away, and now they're put back here. And not only
Yep.
are they put back here, they're put in regular roles.
Mhm.
And that's gotta hurt, like, right? Like, oh, like
Mhm.
when I was in the military, I was working on $100 million jets, and now you're telling me I can't do this office position. And
Yep.
I feel like that's how Bob felt because not only was he was Mr. Incredible,
Mhm.
and
Oh
now
yeah. He was
he's
one of the hot shot big
right,
wig superheroes.
right,
Yeah.
and now he's not only are they saying, "Oh, you have to be Bob, the insurance adjuster," but
Mhm.
you also aren't allowed to do what you're good at and what you're passionate about and what you love. It's a difference between, oh, I'm retiring versus
Mhm.
you're legally not allowed to do that anymore. And I've really did feel for him because that's worse, right? It would be one thing if it was like, oh, I'm retiring from this professional sport, or oh, I'm done here. He was kicked. They were kicked
Yep.
out. They were forced to retire. And Helen, she definitely handled. I feel like she was able to handle it better. Like, okay, it is what it is. Because I think she really absorbed that role of I'm gonna hold the family together.
Yep.
I'm
And
gonna
you
hold the
know,
family together.
part of that too, some of the some of the stereotypes about who fulfills what role in a family could potentially have worked to her favor because and it seemed like their family was molding around this more traditional sense. There's a mother and a father of the children, and the father goes and earns a living. The mother is taking care of the children and doing homemaker stuff.
Hmm.
Within this, I think that worked to her credit in some ways because especially his job was not fulfilling any of the things that he was getting from being a superhero. And so with Helen, she seemed to, like you were saying, she took on the role of overseeing the family. And also, it's super powered kids. So that probably helped her maybe still have a little bit of that edge happening, because how do you maneuver, it's speedster kid and a kid that's turning invisible and waiting for your baby to have like 5 million powers
Right.
eventually. But yeah, I do think that there was an ability to flex for her, maybe because there was that family piece that she was able to put herself into, that just wasn't quite hitting the same way for Bob.
Right.
And then add on top of it that he has that job that is just not a match for him at all. And so he's
Yes.
just clocking in, clocking out. He's trying to sneakily help people who are coming to meet with him at his
Right.
job. And then he's meeting up with his friend, um, another former superhero. They're shooting the shit and they're talking about the old days and they're reminiscing, and once again reminded me a lot of the military. A lot of times that veteran to veteran piece is so important. You're
Yeah.
from
Oh
the
yeah.
same
Having
culture.
Lucius there is very, it was, I'm glad
Yeah,
he had Lucius,
I
Frozone.
know. Oh man, if he didn't have Lucius, things would be so much more rough. Like the
Hmm.
so for him, for her, I think some of the family stuff helped. For him, I think, yeah, Lucius, Frozone, if you don't remember his name. Uh
Samuel L. Jackson, my
Samuel L.
hero,
Jackson's character.
spirit animal.
Where's my super suit? Best line, aside from no capes. Um, but yeah, that camaraderie they were able to hold on to, I think, was key. But you're hitting on something really important, is how much control did you have over the transition you had. So whether it's an athlete, whether it's a superhero, whether it's a first responder or someone in the military, et cetera, et cetera, whoever it is that's doing a lot of this helping work or this really high intensity work, whatever form or fashion it is, there's a big difference. It's not easy to transition, even if it's fully your choice. Even when it's your choice, sometimes it's not technically. It's like, oh, well, my body's aging out. It's kind of your choice when you do it, but also, would you, if your body had kept going for years and years, would you have made that decision, right? So in some respects there's always some piece of things out of your control. But some people are med boarded and leave the military way earlier than they expected. They might have thought they were going to do a full career and retire, and they were only able to do a few years or maybe even a few weeks or months.
And it derails their
Or
plans.
athletes, they get an injury, right? And so, in those set of circumstances, especially when it's a really abrupt change without much warning, which is, I mean, they had some warnings. They knew some things were in the air, but they were pretty much told one day, all right, enough's enough. You done.
Yeah.
And so those changes that are out of your control, or are very abrupt, can be a lot harder to adjust to. And so you see a lot of that in their day to day, is them just trying to adjust to, okay, we're, like you said, we're not allowed to be superheroes, but we still have that history. We've still
Right.
lived through that. So how do we mentally do things? And also, they still have powers. So how do
Right.
you physically go through life, even though you're still Mr. Incredible in some ways, and you're still Elastigirl in some ways.
And I have been through a hard transition like that. And I think one thing that hurt Bob a lot is the field that he had to go into. It didn't
Mhm.
match what he loved. And
Yep.
whenever you are forced or have to do something that you just aren't passionate about at all, it makes
Yep.
it that much more difficult. Like, he was a superhero, he saved people. And they never, one thing they never really touched on was like, was he just getting paid as a superhero, or did he have a job different at that time? Because I
Oh, yeah,
know
they
he
didn't really
had
go into that.
right, because he had the adjuster job, but they also let you know that this they had. had to move around quite a few times because of
Ah, yeah.
screw ups that Bob had. But he literally went from saving lives to doing the bare minimum
Yeah.
to help people. As a matter of fact, he was getting in trouble for helping people too much. Like
Yeah, he was
I
sneakily helping people
right,
that
right,
were
because I'm
coming to his
yeah,
for claims when he wasn't
yeah.
supposed to. Yeah.
And I'm sitting here looking at the situation. I'm like, Bob, why the hell aren't you a firefighter? Like, what are you
Yeah.
like
You know,
this?
I wonder if part of it was the Clark Kent effect. You know how he was told like don't do sports because it's going to
Yeah,
be too hard to not go the extra bit
which is
more
what
and more
Dash
and
is
more.
dealing with.
Right? So Dash is yeah, he's not allowed to do sports
And the dad
because
doesn't
he's
want
a
to hold him
speedster.
back.
Yep, yep, which is adorable once he does cuz
Yeah.
he's essentially they're like do great. No, slow down. No,
Second
don't
place.
slow down
Second
that much.
place.
Second place. Get second place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Adorable. But very interesting where it's a different mentality than especially those of us in the United States I think are used to because we tend to be like be the best, do everything you can, push yourself to the limit and they have to do pretty much the opposite, hold themselves back. But yeah,
Right.
I wonder if that's part of it is maybe he wasn't able to do those sorts of things. But it's a great question and I think you're hitting on something really super duper important that we try and focus on in therapy with someone
Hmm.
is so meaning and purpose is so important and there's a loss here and so it's important for them to be able to grieve and to just feel hurt over the loss of something that was so important to them
Hmm.
and also I love what you were doing with Bob, which is figuring out, okay, so what might be things about Bob or about being a superhero that really hit home for him and that aren't needs that are being met in his job. And how can we make life fit better for him? Even if it can't be the ideal, if the ideal is superhero and he can't have that, how can we still help him hit on those things that matter to him.
Right.
And so, yeah, something like a firefighter is, I think, a great example.
Yeah. Because it's such a rough spot to be in. I left a what I thought was gonna be my lifelong career. I got into it. I realized I didn't like it. And it was the hardest decision I ever made. I had to leave. But what was so rough was after that, I immediately needed income. I took whatever
Mm,
job I could get. And so I went from what was going to be looked at as a very prestigious
mm,
job and like and it would make you feel super important to I was working the front register at a pharmacy. I was just
mm.
selling cigarettes and bubble gum and it was all in like a week and a half span. Like I went
Yeah.
from that position of feeling important to that. And it's happened to me a couple times while I tried to figure things out, but it's such a rough transition and it can
Yep.
happen and it can be rough because of how it makes you feel as far as being valued. It can
Mm,
be rough financially and then it can also be rough socially. So for example, I had my job now, I work virtually and I work at home and it's part of it's been I've been going absolutely frantic and frizzy
mm.
because I'm so used to just being a social person that interacts with 100 people a day to
Yep.
now my 1 year old screams at me a lot and I try and have deep conversations with her and what she responds with is either milk or cereal most of the time. But
Girl
it
after my own heart.
right. It's but yeah, and so it's one of those things. It's this hard shift.
Yep.
It's and I think that's what makes it so rough. It's not a slow transition. It
Oh
is
yeah.
a abrupt transition. It's super uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
like and Bob is just he's 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 not accepting it. That's one thing that's also
Mm,
different about him. He's like, "No, I'm not. No, no." Because what he in his mind, he's like, "No, what I was doing was right. They're the ones
mhm.
who suck. I save people and I deserve to be looked at," which is why he ended up with the dangerous job he had with Syndrome, because they
Yep.
were like, "Hey, we're going to let you use your skills that you're good at
Mhm.
and we're going to pay you." And he's like, "Look, I don't know all the answers. I don't really know what's going on here, but I'll take it. I'll take it
Yep.
because at least now, not only do I feel like I'm doing what I'm good at, but I'm also supporting my family,
Mhm.
because financially it was a lot better than the position he was in. He wasn't super stressed out about messing up something or being too strong. It was a
Mhm.
position that was perfect for him. And so, even though, like I said, we're talking about the Parr family, this set him up to not only feel successful at work, but he was also able to help his family more.
Yep.
He was helping Violet. He was helping
Mhm.
Dash. Like
Yeah,
everything.
there was this whole little
Yeah.
montage where it just shows this shift in him.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, him and his wife are having a bunch of sex,
He's
and
losing weight.
he's losing weight
Yeah.
in a healthy way. He's doing things with his kids. You can tell he feels better about himself,
Right.
and he's connected more. It's really important to to be able to find things that fit for us, and look, I'm coming from a place of privilege saying how great is it when a job can be that thing. It's not always the job. Like you said, Keaton, you need money,
Right.
or there are other things that happen. We aren't always in a position to make our job that thing for us, or you might not want your job to be that. uh there's nothing wrong with saying I literally go to my job to show up, do the thing, and I leave, and then all the rest of my time and energy and resources goes into the things I love. There's
Right.
nothing wrong with that, but there needs to be some ability to put yourself into the things that matter to you.
Right.
Whether it doesn't have to be a job, but it can be nice if there's something in the work, or the relationship someone has, or other things that they're doing. But yeah, you see this whole shift for him, that it's this one change, and then all of the other things fall into place. Now it gets him into some other trouble. He ends up finding out it might not be the cleanest job that he's doing. um he uh he ends up getting captured. He ends up thinking his family dies. I should This movie's been out for a while, y'all. So if this is getting spoiled for you, it's your own fault. But
20
yeah, I mean,
years.
there's all this other stuff that happens later. So was this the perfect job that he thought it was? No. Um, but there were absolutely some things missing for him. And I think you're right too, Keaton, in that a lot of things it's most important to hit those things that are of value to us. But, for a lot of us, it's hard to also ignore how do other people perceive us. And going, you were
Right.
talking about with athletes or your own transition. I'm sure he felt a similar thing. I mean, going from being Mr. Incredible to being the claims guy has to be a really tough shift. But even when it had to stay secret, and he was still working for the insurance company in terms of what anyone else knew about him, he was doing so much better because he knew that he was hitting on these things important to him. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just so important.
One thing that was hard to watch was in these movies, and it's a trope, whenever someone's struggling at their job, they never have a boss that makes it any easier. And
Yeah.
this boss, he like the guy, he's like, "Hey, there's a guy being mugged," and the boss is like, "So?" Like he just does not care. And I felt so bad for him because like you don't get it. Like this is what he does. He saves people, and he's just
Hmm.
like, "Nope, I'm going to talk to you about these forms that you weren't supposed to give that old lady to help her." Like, like you know what? Like, yeah, throw him through 9 walls. Do it. Uh, but um, also, because like you said, Bob is definitely a very interesting character. There's also the kids who
Hmm.
know about their parents' secret life and want to be a part of it so bad, but they are in that generation where it's like, nope, it's not allowed. You better
Hmm.
not. You can't. You have, and that has to be tough for them because oh my gosh, middle and high school is when you're just starting to try and come into yourself and figure things out. And you have a superpower that you are not allowed to use. You're literally, it's like, yeah, I know you're figuring out your entire identity, but you can't figure out or use that part right there, which is a whole lot of it. But sorry, not sorry. Like, hey, I know you're the fastest kid on the planet. You're not allowed to be, though. So while you figure out other things you like besides running, yeah, sorry, I don't know what to tell you. And that's gotta be so, so rough.
It's a really great point that you're bringing up where it would be very interesting to see Violet and Dash in particular as grown-ups.
Oh,
Jack
yeah.
Jack is young enough that things seem to be coming back around. He might not deal with the same issues that you're talking about,
Right,
but it's a very great point that you're bringing up. So there's so much stuff happening developmentally across childhood. And yeah, there's so much stuff related to identity happening in middle school and high school. So many things happening there. And you're trying to figure yourself out. And you're hitting the nail on the head here. Here's this giant chunk of who you are and also of the family history of who your family is that they weren't it was very hush hush and you got the sense even in the home it was watched pretty closely. I mean, they were able to do things at home, but you could see once they were given permission to use their powers, especially for Violet, there was an adjustment that had to happen because
hmm
there was such a focus on hiding or minimizing that part of themselves that she struggles to be able to be as powerful as she can be and needs to be
right,
in these scenarios that come up once finally they're using their powers. And yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how that would affect them later on. Because I mean, if you think about things, don't get me wrong, this is totally different. But if you think about things where, say, a person is not really able to safely explore and their sexuality when things are coming up for them around those same ages,
yeah,
and they have to keep things to themselves or maybe even pretend that they're not there or maybe even convince themselves that something's not there,
right,
um, and then they are able to face that later and grow into themselves in terms of what their sexuality is. A lot of times there can be almost this like redevelopment stage happening. You're more youthful in dating, in relationships, in
hmm
connecting to people sexually because you had to hold back those parts of yourself when everyone else was going through these
right,
pieces. And so while it's different, I would be really interested to see them as adults to see are there certain things with their superpowers that might kind of parallel that situation where other superheroes who maybe were able to be out, so to speak, with their powers from the get go, what are they developmentally behind in some ways?
right. And it doesn't seem, Dash seemed to be fine. He was
Oh,
just
he's
so
raring to go,
excited.
man.
Yeah, he was just so excited to be able to cut loose. Like he was just up for it. And then also, I think it was really good too that Edna just happened to be there with exactly what they needed at the right time.
Love Edna,
I
man.
loved
She's
her.
so great.
Absolutely loved her. And so but yeah, it's got to be difficult. And honestly, it's got to be difficult just having 3 kids is
Mm.
difficult. Having 3 kids that with superpowers, one of them's an infant, like, yeah, that those are the trenches. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna lie. Those are the trenches. And then, like, because I watched both incredible movies. And then the second one when Jack is just like has
Okay,
9
so
different
for any listeners
powers.
not aware, we both have young children.
Yes.
So I I felt for Bob in that movie when he was watching the kids on it and also cackling to myself.
Yeah.
Because once again, they're a more traditional family in some senses. So he's alone with the kids, kind of doing what Helen's been doing all along. Uh, but yeah, that's when Jack gets his powers, and oh man, yeah, he's oh,
Yeah.
he's put through the ringer.
Yeah. Because I mean, yeah, it's just it is a lot. And so one thing I will say that was helpful was I think they had a chance to transition back because basically they were made to quit being superheroes
Mhm.
and then they had kids during that time.
True,
Like
very
they
true.
didn't, and
Yep.
so they
Mhm.
got like I think they got more of a traditional like 9 to 5, but also we have kids to take care of. They had that, and then the superhero aspect came back, and they had to
Yeah.
find like a way to put that in there because unlike
Yeah.
some of the other people will probably talk about this season and how they just have to roll with the punches and they're still staying up all night dealing
Yeah.
with things.
That's actually a really interesting point where another piece of family life in a superhero family when the capes are off, or the masks are off, is absolutely so. It's going to come up time and time again, I'm sure, this season about being able to be consistent and reliable and there when you're not a superhero is
Right.
probably a giant struggle for most superheroes. And
Right.
then so Jack in some ways is going to be lucky in terms of being able to embrace himself probably more from the get-go, where Violet and Dash were really meant to tamper themselves down. On the
Hmm.
flip side though, their parents, this isn't a right or wrong, it's just the reality of what their parents were able to do when but their parents were more reliably there for them.
Right.
Now, Bob was not able to be his best self the entire time, and there's something to be said for that.
Hmm.
And once again, that's not his fault. It's just the reality of the situation.
Hmm.
So there's an argument for being able to be your best self, but maybe not as reliably there. Creating consistency and reliability where you can, even if a parent's not there all the time.
Hmm.
But it's a good point that Jack's upbringing is going to look a lot different from his siblings in some ways, which is interesting.
And circling back to Bob and Helen, they had if we're looking at the second movie, another heavy transition for Bob because Bob had to go from being the main moneymaker in the
Yep.
family to being the stay-at-home parent while Helen went out, and he had a hard time adjusting to that. Like, and it
Yeah,
was
because he was the
because
one chomping at the bit to get out there again, but he
he
wasn't the
was
best fit for it.
he
Yeah, that had to be
was
hard.
yeah,
Good
that
for him though. He took
he
it
got
like a
better.
champ.
He got
Yeah.
better. At
I mean, he
first,
got I mean, he needed time to process it.
yeah,
But
at first, yeah. Because it was one of those things that was funny because like that it just kind of reminds me. It felt like the Incredibles lived in were like it was set during modern times, but it felt like it was the 50s. The way
there
that
there was an older school vibe to it in some ways.
yeah,
I agree with you.
yeah, it had like I still got like that Leave It to Beaver vibe a little bit. Um And so it was like that traditional, like, oh, the mom stays at home and the dad
Mhm.
goes and brings home the bacon, like that lifestyle. That's not
Yeah.
something that millennials are used to. The economy's ruined. We work
We're all working.
9 to 9 every day, whatever it is, and then we drive for Uber. Like, it's a whole thing. Like, we don't get the rest because we're not gonna have Social Security. That's fine. Um, but yeah, he had to be the person that was staying at home, helping the
Mhm.
kids with homework and fixing the lunches and watching Jack Jack. And I'm not gonna lie, that hit me hard because, like I said, I am a virtual. I do have a virtual job, but I also watch my 1 year old during the day at home, and it is rough. That's what I'll say. It's rough.
And she
Um,
doesn't even turn into a demon that hops dimensions. Maybe a little bit. I guess she is a toddler.
yeah, but yeah, and so it's one of those. It's so tough. It's such a
Yeah.
tough transition. It's so difficult. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you. I being a stay-at-home parent is the hardest job I've ever had.
Mm,
Sorry, it's the most difficult. It's the most difficult job because the thing is, it's like because you're trying to still. There's some stay-at-home parents that are also still working, and so that's
mm,
tough. But then on top of that, there's little ones that just need you all the time. You're constantly
mhm,
trying to make sure they're developing the right way and you're being a good parent. And it's just a lot. And so Bob got put through the ringer both movies.
yeah, you did.
He
Yeah.
was really, really going through it and just trying to he was doing his best. He definitely got better. I was a little bit upset with him in the beginning. I was like, dude, your wife needs you. Support her. Like, don't be
Yeah.
that guy.
Just do
Like,
it.
just do it. Like,
Yeah.
don't be that guy. Like, come on. And he eventually came around, and so I was happy with him. I was
I think
happy with him
that's,
about that.
what's interesting is sometimes there are those plots with superheroes where they either have a power swap or they swap powers with someone who doesn't have powers.
Yeah.
And so this in some ways it was a swap and it involved people with superpowers, but it was with the non-superpower part.
Right.
And that was really cool. I hadn't really thought about it in that way, but it was interesting to see. And those are huge changes
Hmm.
happening in the personal life while also there's still the superhero stuff to be done.
Right. Like, it's funny because I think about, like, the idea of, like, gender roles
Mm,
and how that goes, and it's I feel like things have shifted so much now because, like, I look at, like, I will definitely do the cooking, and Colleen loves to do yard work, and it's like
mm.
it's and so it's different, and that's why I was saying in that sense, The Incredibles feels like it could have taken place in the 50s because you have those gender roles that you don't really see as often
Yeah, I mean, you don't, but
anymore. Like, they're still
there's
there,
there's still plenty of people who have those traditional gender roles and plenty of people who
there's
like
nothing
it
wrong
that
with
way
that.
and
Yeah,
there's
there's
nothing
nothing
wrong
wrong.
with that.
There's
Yeah.
absolutely nothing wrong
Just
with
like
that.
there's nothing wrong with swapping that. I
Right.
think a lot of it is what fits for the family. And what I liked here is that so in the first movie, you see how much superhero stuff matters to Bob. And you see Helen keeping the family together. What I really like is that you then see once again that swap and she's doing the superheroing and you see how important that is to her. And then you see Bob eventually be willing to take on what she's been doing with the family. And I really appreciate that too because once again you saw in the first movie how important this stuff is to him. And so this is an example of a big shift where it took time, but he
Yes.
was able to be more flexible with it.
Hmm.
And like we talked about the match of is it giving you what you need maybe not in the ideal way that you would prefer,
Right.
but still giving you what you want in some sense. There's still the superheroing in the incredible family. There's still the importance of family. There are, ways that he's able to do things that he values just
Hmm.
in a different way. And so I think that that helps with him being able to transition in that way, as opposed to in the first movie where he was just completely miserable.
Right. Right. I I also like how they get through things together as a family. Like
Yeah.
they have their issues, but they still get through it, and it's like, all right, it's all five of us together.
Yep.
We're gonna handle this. We're gonna figure it out. And a lot of times it's all four of them, and one of them's taking care of Jack Jack. Like
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
yeah. But I do love it.
But even that's a really cool thing. Violet, I think at one point, they're all upset about having to watch Jack Jack not being able to be a part of the action. And then there's one point where she's like, actually, I think I should stay behind with Jack Jack. And it's this
Yeah,
whole moment of
yeah,
that's actually her really becoming almost an adult part of the family.
yeah.
Because yeah, there are these like it's definitely we're doing this as a family, and then also that doesn't mean we're all doing the same thing. It doesn't mean we're all fighting the bad guy per
Right.
se. They do a really great job, in my opinion. Helen MVP, really, because she very quickly
She's
says,
amazing.
"Okay, here's what we need to do. Here's what my different family members need in order to be supported in the way that they need to hit the next level of what needs to happen here." So she was able to like support them emotionally, get them where they needed to go with things. And she was also really good at figuring out, okay, who does what.
Hmm.
Don't have Dash try and do what Bob does. Don't have Violet try and do what I do. She really knows and understands what each member of the family can bring to the table.
Right.
She, once again, like you were talking about, she really does have that family focus.
She
And it's
does.
so cool to see in those movies
And
how the
it
family comes together.
And it makes me wonder, like, because I understand why Bob was an insurance adjuster. It was for our own laughter. But in reality, I really think that, like, he would have never been in that job. Like, I feel like
Mm,
Helen would have helped him figure out, like, let's
that's
let's
a fair
get you,
point. Once
like,
again, real MVP.
yeah,
She's the MVP, man.
she absolutely is. But I absolutely love these movies. I felt like it was the perfect place to
Oh yeah.
start this new season, right? I just it was very fitting, and I'd love how wholesome it is. I
Yeah.
so many times we cover things and it's just dark and
Yeah.
gritty, and
I
like this
mean, we
is
love Batman. We did it to ourselves.
right. But like, yeah, and so if we're looking at a spectrum, I think it goes from the boys on the
Yeah.
far end to the Incredibles on the other
Okay.
end.
There you go.
Where
There you
it's
go.
although Syndrome was a little scary, I'm not gonna lie. He
Yeah.
was
And actually, like in
intense.
terms of the season with JVS, haven't you watched ahead? You've actually well, by the time this episode releases, I guess the boys will have started. But
Yeah,
you
I've
got to
seen
watch it
like,
ahead and you said there's some good stuff that we could talk about this season,
oh
right?
yeah, I this new season of The Boys is really good. Y'all are gonna like it for sure. It is hush hush, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's good. It's really good. I'm excited.
Yeah. So hey, maybe we'll have to come back around to the boys again this time.
Oh yeah, we'll
I
have
don't
to
know. It's
swing.
all like you said, it's like the other end of the spectrum. Well, I mean, we'll get to the dark side. It's just when we do I agree. When we do the lighthearted stuff, I'm like, oh man, this is so nice. I feel so
This is nice.
good.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I think it'll be difficult about the boys with this is they're literally never out of costume. Like I never
Yeah,
see
that's
any
true.
of those heroes out of
That's
costume.
true. So, it might not be
Yeah.
the watch the boys. It'll be fun, but yeah, maybe they're for a different season.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. But definitely check out The Incredibles. Both of them on Disney Plus.
Thanks for nerding out with us. I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown.
And I'm educator and comic aficionado Keaton Hopkins. Check out my TV and movie reviews on YouTube at Team JVS. Check out our website at bat-therapy.com our Bat Therapy YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. And don't forget our Patreon page at patreon.com/battherapy. See you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.